All right, so we're diving into the Druids today.
Ooh,
It's a mystery
yeah,
that has fascinated people for centuries,
it has.
and you've asked for the real story
Right.
behind these mysterious figures.
Yes.
And we've got a whole bunch of sources ready to go,
I'm ready.
from ancient Roman texts to medieval Irish tales.
Oh, wow.
And get this, our whole image of Druids,
Oh,
those robed figures conjuring magic in the middle of Stonehenge,
I know.
might be based on just a few biased accounts.
It's crazy.
Are you ready to separate fact from fiction?
I am.
Let's go.
It's amazing how powerful those few accounts really are.
I know.
We're talking about figures who've inspired countless books and movies and even like
Yeah.
modern spiritual movements.
Yeah.
Yet the hard evidence is surprisingly scarce.
It is.
It's like trying to assemble a puzzle
Okay.
where half the pieces are missing
Uh-huh.
and the other half might be from a totally different picture.
Exactly. So before we get too lost in the myths,
Okay.
let's ground ourselves.
Right.
Who were the Druids, according to the sources that we have?
At their core, they were the experts in religion, magic, and spirituality
Okay.
for the people who lived in northwestern Europe
Right.
about 2,000 years ago.
Okay.
We're talking modern day France, Belgium, and the British Isles.
Okay.
Think of them as keepers of knowledge,
Okay.
advisors to kings, interpreters of the natural world,
Mhm.
holding a position of immense influence.
Okay, so imagine a world where your doctor, your lawyer, and your spiritual advisor,
All in one.
all rolled into one, is a Druid.
Yes.
But
Here's the catch.
it's a catch, and it's a big one.
Yeah,
We don't have any first-hand accounts
we don't.
from the Druids themselves.
Nothing.
No diaries, no sacred texts, no inscriptions
So no.
on ancient stone tablets.
So we're flying blind.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Like trying to understand
Okay.
a lost civilization
shit.
based solely on what their rivals said about them.
Oh, okay.
And that's where the Roman perspective comes in.
We rely heavily on accounts from Roman writers,
Right.
most notably Julius Caesar,
Right.
whose Gallic Wars describes his conquest of Gaul.
Right. Caesar, you'd think a busy general wouldn't have time for ethnographic studies. But there he is,
There he is.
giving us the lowdown on the Druids.
Well, and it's important to remember that
Yeah.
Caesar wasn't exactly an objective observer.
I mean, he's writing his own history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He was a conqueror
Of course.
with a motive to justify his actions
of course.
and portray the Gauls as barbarians in need of Roman rule.
So how does he spin the Druid tale?
Yeah.
Do they come off as wise sages or fearsome sorcerers?
He paints a complex picture.
Oh.
On one hand, he describes them as learned and powerful,
Okay.
skilled in astronomy, philosophy, and law,
Yeah.
settling disputes,
Oh, wow.
advising on matters of war and peace,
Uh-huh.
even excommunicating people from society.
That's some serious clout.
Right.
But if they were so influential, why didn't they lead a more organized resistance against the Roman invasion?
That's a great question, and
Yeah.
one that highlights the potential bias in Caesar's account.
Okay.
He might be downplaying their political power to make the Roman victory seem more inevitable.
Yeah, that's right.
But he also emphasizes something else that would resonate with a Roman audience:
What's that?
human sacrifice.
Ah, yes. The Romans loved to use that accusation to demonize their enemies. But was it true in the case of the Druids?
That's where things get murky.
Okay.
Caesar claims human sacrifice was central to their religion,
Okay.
describing elaborate rituals
Right.
and even wicker men, those giant effigies we've all seen in movies.
Right, right.
But was this a genuine practice or an exaggeration to justify Roman conquest?
It wouldn't be the first time a conquering power twisted the truth to suit their agenda.
Right.
But there's another layer of complexity here, right? Didn't Caesar die before he finished the Gallic Wars?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
We know another author finished the book,
Yeah.
possibly Aulus Hirtius.
Wow. So we can't even be sure.
Right.
If that section on Druids was actually written by Caesar himself,
Exactly.
talk about a historical mystery. It's like playing a game of telephone with the past.
Totally.
The message gets distorted with each retelling.
I know, and it gets even more intriguing.
Really?
Caesar's own account has inconsistencies.
Oh, right.
He describes Druids as separate from the ruling class,
Okay.
yet mentions a Gallic chieftain who was both a political leader and a Druid.
Oh, so a Druid king.
Yeah.
Ah,
It suggests the line between religious and secular authority might have been blurrier
yeah.
than he initially lets on.
So already we're seeing a more nuanced picture emerge.
Right.
But what happens to this Roman perception of Druids after Caesar? Did they become best friends?
Not quite.
Oh.
If anything, they become even more demonized.
Oh.
Later Roman writers, drawing on earlier accounts,
Yeah.
but adding their own spin,
Right.
portray the Druids as increasingly sinister.
Okay.
They add accusations of cannibalism and emphasize human sacrifice as a defining characteristic.
Yikes. It seems the further we get from actual contact with Druids,
Yeah.
the more they become this monstrous caricature.
That's a key takeaway.
Yeah.
The Roman construction of the Druid, and it's important they use that distinct term instead of generic words for priests or magicians,
Interesting.
played a huge role in shaping their image for centuries.
It's like they were creating a brand, a label for the other,
Yeah.
the barbarian that needed to be conquered and civilized.
Exactly.
But let's see if archaeology can shed some light on this.
Okay.
You'd think with all the fascination around Druids, we'd have tons of artifacts directly linked to their practices.
All right.
So where's the archaeological evidence?
That's the frustrating part.
Boy,
It's incredibly elusive.
really?
While we have a lot of archaeological evidence of Iron Age religious life in northwestern Europe,
Okay.
think sacred groves,
Yeah.
ritual enclosures,
Okay.
votive offerings,
Right.
nothing definitively says this belonged to a druid.
So no ancient Druid business cards. That's a bummer.
I know.
But surely there must be some artifacts that at least hint at Druidic involvement, right?
Maybe.
I've heard about the Doctor's Grave and the Cavernum Crown.
You're on the right track.
Okay.
The doctor's grave was discovered in Colchester
Mhm.
and contained surgical instruments, suggesting a connection to healing practices.
Right.
Some sources associate those with druids.
Okay.
Similarly, the Cavernum crown,
Yeah.
a beautifully crafted metal crown,
I've seen pictures.
has been speculated to have belonged to a druid,
Okay.
but it could just as easily have been worn by a chieftain or other high-ranking individual.
So once again, ambiguity reigns supreme.
Precisely.
It's like finding a paintbrush
Yeah.
and trying to determine if it belonged to Leonardo da Vinci
Yeah.
or just a skilled artisan of the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The lack of definitive evidence
Right.
makes it difficult to draw firm conclusions.
Yeah.
And this ambiguity extends to the debate over human sacrifice as well.
Right. We talked about the Roman accounts.
Yeah.
But what about the physical evidence?
There are archaeological findings,
Like what?
such as bog bodies,
Okay.
with signs of ritualistic killing that suggest some form of ritual killing took place in Iron Age Europe.
Right.
However, it's impossible to say for certain whether these were instances of human sacrifice as an offering to a deity
Yeah.
or something else entirely.
It seems every path we take leads to more questions than answers.
That's the nature of historical inquiry,
Yeah.
especially when dealing with cultures that left behind limited written records.
Right.
We have to be comfortable with the unknown
Yeah.
and resist the urge to fill in the gaps with our own assumptions.
So we've got this hazy picture of Druids from Roman sources.
Yeah.
And archaeology isn't offering any concrete answers.
Right.
Let's shift gears and talk about the Roman invasion of Britain.
Okay.
Did Druids play a role in resisting the Romans on British soil?
There's one account
Okay.
from the Roman historian Tacitus. Okay.
That paints a dramatic picture
Right.
of their involvement in his
Oh.
histories.
Mhm.
Tacitus describes a Roman army's encounter
Oh.
with Druids on the island of Anglesey,
Okay.
off the coast of Wales.
Okay, now this sounds like a movie scene waiting to happen.
Right.
Set the stage for us.
Okay, imagine the Roman army,
Right.
led by General Suetonius Paulinus,
Uh-huh.
advancing on Anglesey.
Okay.
This island was a strategic resistance base for the Britons.
Uh-huh.
As the Romans approach the shore,
Yeah.
they're met with a sight that chills them to the bone.
I bet those battle-hardened Roman soldiers weren't easily spooked.
You would think.
What did they see?
Tacitus describes a scene straight out of a nightmare.
Okay.
Tall, imposing Druids are
Mhm.
shouting curses at the invaders,
Wow.
while black-robed women
Oh, wow.
wielding flaming torches
Whoa.
add to the terrifying spectacle.
Oh, my goodness.
It's a clash of cultures.
Roman might versus the perceived otherworldly powers of the Druids.
You can practically hear the dramatic music swelling in the background.
Right.
But did panic set in?
Well, before it could, their general Suetonius Paulinus
Yeah.
rallies his troops.
Good.
He shames them for being afraid of what he calls a bunch of silly women
Oh, my goodness.
and urges them to attack.
And did they?
They did, and
Oh,
quite
well,
successfully.
They did.
They did.
Oh.
The Romans invaded Anglesey,
Oh.
defeating the Britons and destroying their sacred groves.
Oh.
Tacitus then adds a gruesome detail,
Whoa.
claiming they found evidence of horrific human sacrifices in these groves.
Oh, really?
Justifying their actions as a necessary evil against barbarity.
Wait a minute. Haven't we heard this tune before? Romans conquer, Romans demonize, Romans justify.
You're catching on.
Yeah.
It's crucial to remember that Tacitus,
Yeah.
while a talented historian, also had a flair for the dramatic.
Okay.
He might have embellished the story
Okay.
for effect,
Yeah.
emphasizing Roman superiority and the savagery of their enemies.
So we have to take this account with a grain of salt,
Yes.
considering the potential for bias and exaggeration.
Absolutely. But even if we strip away the dramatic elements,
Okay.
it's significant that Tacitus uses the term Druid specifically in this context.
Okay.
It suggests that these individuals held a distinct religious
Yeah.
or spiritual role
Okay.
within British society.
All right.
Their presence was seen as a powerful force even by the Romans.
And was this the only mention of Druids in connection with Roman Britain?
Surprisingly, yes.
Great.
You'd think they'd be mentioned more often,
Yeah.
especially given their later association with Stonehenge and other prehistoric sites.
Right.
But no, it's just this one dramatic episode on Anglesey.
So Anglesey becomes Druid Island in the popular imagination.
Right.
But what about the rest of Britain?
Right.
Were Druids just concentrated in Wales, waiting for the Romans to arrive?
It's unclear.
Clearly.
The lack of other mentions could mean they weren't as widespread as we might assume,
Okay.
or their role had evolved differently in other parts of Britain.
Okay.
It's also possible Roman sources didn't find them noteworthy enough to mention
Right.
outside of this specific conflict.
More mysteries to ponder. But before we get lost in speculation,
Yes.
let's move on to another fascinating source.
Okay.
Medieval Irish literature.
Ooh.
I love those.
How do the Druids fare in these tales?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Because the Irish portrayal is quite different from the Roman one.
All right.
For the Irish, Druids were primarily associated with magic,
Okay.
not necessarily with religion in the way we might think of it.
Oh, interesting.
In fact, the word for magic in medieval Irish directly translates to druidcraft.
So less priests and more like wizards.
In a sense, yes.
Okay.
They're depicted as figures with supernatural abilities.
Okay.
Shape-shifting, controlling the weather,
Uh-huh.
wielding powerful spells.
Think Merlin from the Arthurian legends,
Okay.
but with a distinctly Irish flavor.
Okay, I'm already picturing epic battles between druids hurling fireballs and summoning mythical beasts.
I know, right?
Yeah.
While there's certainly an element of fantastical storytelling in these tales,
Right.
they provide a valuable window into how the Irish viewed and remembered their pre-Christian past.
Right.
And it's fascinating how the image of the Druid, once demonized by the Romans, becomes woven into Irish mythology and folklore.
So are the druids the heroes or the villains in these Irish stories?
That's where it gets even more complex.
What do you mean?
They're both.
What?
Sometimes they're portrayed as demonic figures,
Oh.
representing the old pagan ways
Okay.
that must be defeated by Christian heroes,
Yeah.
like St. Patrick.
Right.
Other times they're heroic figures
Okay.
embedded in Irish mythology,
Yeah.
showcasing their wisdom, magic, and connection to the land.
So they're like the ultimate wild card. Capable of great good or great evil.
Exactly.
Wow.
And this dual portrayal raises another fascinating question.
What's that?
Are these depictions a genuine reflection of pre-Christian beliefs and practices?
Yeah.
Or are they creative inventions by Christian writers
Okay.
who were reshaping the past to fit their own narratives?
It's like they're saying, hey, these druids, they were pretty powerful.
Right.
Even if they were on the wrong side.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if there's a hidden respect,
I know.
maybe even a bit of fear lurking beneath those
Oh.
Christianized tales.
Right.
But that's a conversation for another time, perhaps.
We'll save that one.
We've covered a lot of ground already, from Roman accounts to Irish legends.
We have.
And it's clear the story of the Druids is far from simple.
It is.
There's one more piece of the puzzle we need to explore.
Okay.
The enduring legacy of the Druids in modern times.
All right.
We'll get into that after a quick
It really is remarkable how the Druids have managed to capture the modern
I
imagination,
know, it's like
despite the scarcity of concrete historical evidence.
they've gone from like shadowy figures in these ancient texts to full-blown pop culture icons.
It's true.
It's like you see them everywhere
Yeah.
in books, movies, TV shows, even video games.
Yeah.
And it's not just entertainment.
Right.
There's a genuine resurgence
Yeah.
of interest in Druidry as a spiritual path,
Right.
especially like in connection with nature-based spirituality and celebrations of the land.
Yeah,
It's like they've tapped into this deep longing within us
I agree.
to reconnect with something ancient and primal.
I think you've hit on something there.
Have I?
The Druids, whether real or imagined,
Right.
embody a connection to nature and a sense of mystery
Right.
that many people find appealing in our increasingly technological world.
We talked earlier about how the Romans demonized the Druids.
Right.
When did that perception start to shift? And what sparked this renewed interest in their history and traditions?
It's interesting, isn't it?
It is.
The shift began around the 17th and 18th centuries.
Okay.
Think about the context of Europe at that time.
I am.
The rise of nation-states
Uh-huh.
led to a search for distinct national identities and histories.
Okay.
People were looking to the past
Yeah.
for heroic figures and ancient wisdom.
I can see that.
And the Druids,
Yeah.
shrouded in mystery and connected to pre-Christian Europe,
Right.
fit the bill perfectly.
So they became a symbol of a romanticized past,
Right.
a time before industrialization and modern complexities.
Yes.
It's like projecting our own ideals onto these figures from the distant past.
Precisely.
I'm full of good ideas today.
And figures like William Stukely,
Okay.
often called the father of field archaeology,
Right.
played a key role in cementing this association.
How so?
Stukely was obsessed with ancient Britain,
Okay.
convinced that the Druids were the architects of Stonehenge
Wow.
and other megalithic monuments.
That makes sense.
Right.
Stonehenge is already so mysterious and awe-inspiring.
It is.
To think that these ancient priests might have been the masterminds behind it
Yeah.
just adds another layer of intrigue.
Exactly. And while Stukely's ideas aren't entirely accurate
But-
from a modern archaeological perspective,
Right.
they had a huge impact
Uh-oh.
on how people viewed these sites. He created a narrative that linked the Druids to the distant past,
Mm-hmm.
imbuing them with an aura of ancient wisdom and power.
And that narrative has persisted to this day.
It has.
Every time you see a documentary about Stonehenge,
Right.
you can almost guarantee they'll mention Druids at some point.
It's become so ingrained in popular culture
Right.
that it's almost impossible to separate the two.
Yeah.
And it's not just Stonehenge either.
No.
The Druids have become associated with numerous prehistoric sites
Uh-huh.
across Britain and Ireland,
Right.
even though there's no concrete evidence linking them
Oh, really?
to most of these locations.
It's like they've become the default explanation for anything ancient and mysterious. But let's be honest, there's one particular event that people instantly associate with Druids,
Oh, yeah.
and that's the winter solstice.
Ah, yes, the winter solstice.
Yes, the shortest day of the year,
Right.
a time of rebirth and renewal.
Exactly.
It's a potent symbol, and the Druids have become inextricably linked to its celebration,
I know.
even though the connection is more about romantic imagination than historical accuracy.
Right.
Didn't this association stem from like a brief mention in Pliny the Elder's Natural History?
You have a good memory.
I try.
Pliny, writing in the 1st century AD,
Okay.
describes a mistletoe ritual performed by the Gauls. He believed they had Druids
Okay.
and said they would gather in oak groves,
Like-
dressed in white robes,
Okay.
and cut mistletoe with a golden sickle.
Okay, that image is iconic.
I know, right?
White robes, a golden sickle, mistletoe. It's practically the Druid starter kit.
Exactly.
And even though Pliny's account is brief
Yeah.
and doesn't specifically mention the winter solstice, it's become the foundation for so many modern interpretations and traditions.
I know, it's crazy.
The image of Druids performing rituals under a mistletoe-laden oak tree,
Right.
invoking the power of the returning sun,
Yeah,
is deeply evocative,
it is.
even if it might be more fiction than fact.
It's amazing how a few lines from an ancient Roman text
I know.
can have such a lasting impact on our cultural perceptions.
But this image of the Druids celebrating the winter solstice speaks to something deeper, doesn't it?
It does.
With-
Like what? It speaks to our fascination with the cycles of nature,
Right.
the turning of the seasons,
Yeah.
the promise of renewal. The Druids, with their connection to the natural world,
Yeah.
become symbols of this timeless dance between darkness and light.
It's like they embody a connection to something larger than ourselves.
Yeah.
A sense of wonder and awe
Right.
that's often missing in our modern lives.
It is.
But let's come back to Earth for a moment
Okay.
and address the elephant in the room,
Yeah.
human sacrifice. It's a charged topic that comes up repeatedly
It does.
in both Roman accounts and archaeological discussions.
Right.
Did the Druids actually practice human sacrifice?
Yeah.
Or is that just Roman propaganda?
That's the million-dollar question. And it's one that we can't answer definitively.
Right.
The evidence, as we've discussed, is open to interpretation.
Okay.
We need to consider both the Roman accounts and the archaeological findings while acknowledging the limitations of each.
On the one hand, we have those vivid descriptions from Roman writers claiming that human sacrifice was central to Druidic religion.
Yeah.
They talk about gruesome rituals, wicker men, and all sorts of horrifying practices.
I know.
But can we trust those accounts?
Well, we have to remember the context.
Right.
The Romans had a strong incentive to portray the people they conquered as barbaric and uncivilized.
Right.
Accusing them of human sacrifice was a way to demonize them and justify Roman conquest. It's possible, even likely, that they exaggerated or distorted the truth to fit their own agenda.
So we can't take those accounts at face value.
Right.
But then we have the archaeological evidence, bog bodies, ritualistic burials, offerings of weapons and valuables.
Right.
Those findings can't be easily dismissed.
That's true.
So what do they mean?
There are archaeological findings that suggest some form of ritual killing might have taken place in Iron Age Europe.
All right.
But it's impossible to say for certain whether these were instances of human sacrifice in the sense of a deliberate offering to a deity or something else entirely.
Could they have been executions of criminals?
Possibly.
Or ritual killings related to warfare or ancestor veneration practices that, while perhaps disturbing to us, might have had completely different meanings within their own cultural context.
Exactly. Without written records from the people involved.
Right.
We're left to interpret the evidence.
Based on our own assumptions and understanding.
Okay.
And that's where things get tricky.
How so?
We're imposing our own values and beliefs onto a past that might have had completely different perspectives on life, death, and the sacred.
It's like trying to understand a completely different culture through a very narrow lens.
Exactly.
It's a reminder that we need to be cautious about projecting our own modern sensibilities onto the past.
Precisely.
Right.
The question of whether the Druids practice human sacrifice remains unanswered.
It's a mystery.
It is.
That will probably never be solved.
It's one of those enduring mysteries that will likely continue to be debated for years to come.
Okay.
And perhaps that's okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes the most intriguing questions in history don't have easy answers.
It's a reminder that history isn't just about finding neat and tidy answers, but about embracing the uncertainty and acknowledging the limitations of our knowledge.
It's about appreciating the complexity of the past and recognizing that we may never fully unravel all its secrets.
Right.
But that doesn't mean we should stop searching.
Exactly.
So after all this exploration, after sifting through the fragments of history, the conflicting accounts, and the evolving interpretations, what's the final takeaway for our listener? What do you want them to remember about the Druids?
I think the most important thing is to approach the subject with curiosity and an open mind. Don't be afraid to question assumptions. Delve into the sources and form your own interpretations. The Druids may forever remain an enigma, but in engaging with their story, we open ourselves up to a world of possibilities, a world where history meets imagination and the boundaries between past, present, and future blur.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that history isn't just about dates and facts, but also about stories, interpretations, and the ongoing dialogue between the past and present. It's about recognizing that the past is not a static thing, but a living, breathing entity that continues to shape who we are today.
Absolutely. And one way we see that dialogue playing out is through the modern Druid revival. There are actual Druid groups and organizations today that practice their own forms of spirituality and ritual, drawing inspiration from both historical sources and modern interpretations.
It's fascinating, isn't it? You have these ancient figures who were shrouded in mystery and demonized by the Romans, and now, centuries later, people are finding meaning and inspiration in their traditions. It makes you wonder what the Druids of old would think of their modern-day counterparts.
I suspect they might be surprised by some of the interpretations, but also heartened by the enduring connection to nature and the pursuit of spiritual wisdom that lies at the heart of the Druid revival. Modern Druidry is a diverse movement with a range of beliefs and practices, but generally emphasizes a connection to nature, reverence for the cycles of life and death, and a commitment to personal growth and spiritual exploration.
So it's less about recreating some ancient historical practice and more about finding a meaningful way to connect with the natural world and with one's own inner self.
Precisely. It's about reclaiming a sense of the sacred in a modern world that often feels disconnected from the rhythms of nature and the deeper mysteries of existence.
I can see how that would resonate with people, especially in today's world, where we're facing so many environmental challenges and searching for meaning beyond the material. There's a growing awareness that we're part of something larger than ourselves, and that we need to rediscover our place within the natural world.
It's a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to seek connection, meaning, and a sense of belonging, even in the face of uncertainty and constant change. And perhaps that's the greatest legacy of the Druids. They remind us that we're part of a story that spans millennia, a story that connects us to the past, the present, and the future.
Beautifully said. So after all this exploration, after sifting through the fragments of history, the conflicting accounts, and the evolving interpretations, what's the ultimate takeaway for our listener? What do we want them to remember about the Druids?
I would say this: the Druids, whether they were powerful priests, wise sages, or something else, entirely continue to spark debate and inspire new interpretations even today. They serve as a potent reminder of the enduring power of symbols, the allure of mystery, and the importance of approaching history with a sense of wonder and a willingness to challenge our assumptions.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of the Druids, we leave you with more questions than answers. Were they the spiritual leaders shaping the destiny of their people? Or were they simply a convenient bogeyman for those seeking to justify conquest and cultural dominance? Perhaps they were both, or something else entirely. The mystery remains, but that's part of what makes them so fascinating, isn't it?
Absolutely. The search for understanding is often more rewarding than the answer itself. And who knows? Maybe someday new evidence will come to light that sheds further light on these enigmatic figures. Until then, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the spirit of curiosity alive.
Well said. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the fascinating and ever-evolving world of the Druids.